Hi guys, it's Khalid. I hope everybody is doing well. Today I'm going to talk about wokeness. The What I'm trying to do is talk about it in a way that's useful, right? Most debate and discussion, including a lot of my silly little contributions, are like, wokeness sucks, or wokeness is good, or we should stop doing it, or we should do it more. We're going to put all that stuff aside for today, and we're going to talk about wokeness in a way that hopefully illuminates something about the world. So we're going to treat it not as the object of discussion, but rather as a tool to understand the world from which it emerges. A good analogy for this is think about like stumbling upon a cave painting somewhere, a set of cave paintings. They depict a bunch of stuff. So what you want to do is you want to study them, figure out the kind of tools that were used to create them, figure out when they were created, look at the diagrams and the pictograms or whatever the hell they are, and using all that you notice, try to glean something about the society from which those cave paintings emerged. And I'm going to try as much as possible to give wokeness that kind of treatment. Okay, so where do we start? Well, I guess to summarize how I'm going to go about doing this, I'm going to define wokeness. I'm going to try to go into some exploration, like some fine detail exploration, using maybe some examples. And then after we're done with that, after we've made our observations and taken some notes and whatever of the cave paintings, we go into the phase of wild speculation. Okay, these cave paintings tell me this about the society and the moment from which this emerged. And in this case, the question that we're trying to answer isn't whether wokeness is good or bad. That is ultimately a silly question. The question to answer is, why is wokeness occurring? Okay. Okay, so let's start with the definition. Wokeness is a social behavior. Okay. People have different definitions in their head for what wokeness is. I honestly don't give a shit about them. My definition is I'm trying to get as close to the bone as possible, like the lowest level possible. And to my mind, the basic common denominator is the fact that wokeness is something that people do for and in front of each other. Specifically, the kind of social behavior that wokeness is, or the specific act that's being performed, is an act that attempts to place moral worth upon the speaker, right? So usually wokeness is something along the lines of you say a nugget of information, abstract, concrete, historical, current, anything. It really doesn't matter. It sort of belongs to a category of liberal sensibilities, approved and somewhat expanding liberal sensibilities. And embedded within this little nugget is like a moral claim. There's a good and a bad associated with this expression, and implied or explicitly stated is where you stand on that question, the right side, always, right? So by performing the social behavior, you're communicating your moral value. This is kind of like the lowest level thing that people are doing. You can discuss the implications of this behavior, right? Whether those implications are good or bad. You can discuss whether they're necessary, all that stuff, but that's not what we're doing here. The There are three things that I would note about social behaviors in general that are pertinent here. The first is that social behaviors are performed based on incentives, right? We're animals. We seek food when we're hungry. We seek warmth when we're cold, and because we're social animals, social behaviors are tied to the incentive structures that we have, right? So we perform social behaviors for each other to increase our social worth, to maximize social bonds, create create group bonds. Like there are a set of valuable things that emerge out of social behaviors, and our our desire, our impetus to perform these social behaviors is tied within that incentive structure. So we are doing them for a reason. It's not arbitrary. If it's like a couple of people are doing random behaviors, you can say, okay, this is an arbitrary thing. But if it exists as a phenomenon, then it is genuinely worthwhile to ask what incentive structure exists that reinforces this kind of behavior and repeats it and perpetuates it. So one, we do it for a reason. Two, okay, we do it more or less based on the social value of this behavior, right? So this is kind of like an extension of the first point, right? We do it for a reason, and the importance of that reason or the social value of that reason dictates whether this behavior increases or atrophies over time within whatever social context that exists. Which brings us to the third point, which is that social behaviors only make sense or should always be understood based on the social context within which they're performed, right? Something that happens between two friends, okay, means very different things when the same kind of behavior happens between a parent and a child, or somebody and their like enemy, or even like when you want to look at abstract social actors, like a corporation doing messaging to the public in order to sell its product. Within each one of those contexts, the basic behavior could be the same, right? In each one of those instances, somebody can do, a behavior like wokeness, but why they're doing it could be somewhat divergent. Okay, and not like the social value, this thing that we just talked about in the last point, the social value of that behavior modulates wildly from one context to another, right? How I behave around my friends, okay, the incentives that I have are very, very different than the incentives that I have when I'm with like an opponent, or I'm with family, or whatever it might be. Okay, which gives us sort of the first kind of like this observation is important in being able to understand wokeness's role in society. In that, if wokeness was the same everywhere, in all the different contexts, then it's really hard to extract any information out of there. But the fact that it is variable allows us to actually look for correlations. Okay, what are the patterns that exist here? Where is it emerging? And from there, you can kind of ask subsequent questions. Why is it emerging here but not there? Finally, the final point is that just like wokeness is variable from one social relation to another, and it's only meaningful within those social relations, but just like it's variable within those social relations, it's variable also over time. Okay, so 10 years ago, wokeness, or even kind of like the general equivalent of wokeness, which is this act of moralism, public moralism, moral perfuming, where you make declarations about things that are good and bad, and in a sense commit yourself to one side of it. That's not always in high demand. Okay, sometimes the market is low, and right now the market is fucking hot. Like, it's a bull market for wokeness. And not everywhere, not with everybody, but that dynamic, that dimension, the time dimension, and observing where the ebbs and flows are, also, just like the dynamism associated with the social relations and the social context, the dynamic nature of wokeness or social behavior over time allows us to make observations like, why is it happening right now? What does this correlate to? What pattern can we detect? Okay, so this is my general definition of wokeness, and a few nuances and caveats to keep in mind. Let's do one more thing before we jump into like a deep dive, which is like, let's provide a simple, like, I think a really good example of wokeness. If you've ever been in a kind of middle class or upper middle class neighborhood in the United States, what you're gonna see on lawns or in windows are signs that say something along the lines of, in this house we believe that all humans are legal, women's rights are human rights, Black Lives Matter, science is real, a bunch of like genuinely empty, vacuous statements, like they have no political or actionable content. They are expressions of some moral rule for which the owner of that house or the renter of that apartment or whatever it is declaring to the world in a very public way, okay, that they stand on one side of this moral question. Okay, people go out of their way, go buy these posters, put them in the front yard, and leave them there for extended periods of time. That is an act of wokeness. Social behavior that indicates your moral position around a set of questions, or one or more questions, or observations, or whatever it might be. Okay, so let's go into like a nice little deep dive. So what I'm going to do is go through various social. So I said, like, this wokeness, this social behavior varies amongst the context within which it exists. And so we're just going to go through a bunch of social relations and ask the basic questions associated with it. Okay, what are the incentives that are at play within that social relation? How does wokeness manifest within that context? Is wokeness reinforced or not based on the primary incentive structure or the primary incentives that exist in that social relation? And whatever other questions may tumble out. Okay, so the first example that we're gonna look at, the first social relation that we're gonna navigate, is the Democratic Party on one hand and their voters on the other, right? This is a social relation. The Democratic Party acts as a social entity. It has communication and messaging through various conduits, mostly like actually individuals who act as representatives of the party, and their base, right? The the population in general, but specifically a subset of the population that the Democratic Party relies on in order to maintain its power and relevance. So the primary incentive structure that exists between the two is a question of extracting votes and money and financial support from the base up to the party itself. The question that now we bring in, like the question of wokeness, like, okay, what is the woke behavior that the Democratic Party is or isn't performing? Like, we'll take an example. Like, one, I would claim that the Democratic Party is constantly performing acts of wokeness. But as an example, we can take a look at somebody like Joe Biden, who now frequently says things like, the United States is steeped in racism and white supremacy. Again, an abstract, politically empty statement, right? Like, there's no actionable content to it, which is awesome. Especially for a political party, not to have to do anything except make platitudes. And what they do is by doing this, they're morally perfuming themselves, right? They're adding social value to themselves at no cost, because the base, or this is how I understand it, because again, I'm trying as much as possible to constrain myself to the known incentives and matching that up with the behaviors. Like, can I understand the behavior through the lens of the incentives? This behavior seems to be something that the base, that the Democrats care about, the base that will vote for them, and the base, honestly, more importantly, that will fund them, okay, finds these acts of these empty declarations of moral worth, they find them valuable and appealing. They have high social value. And so when I look at that, I say, okay, wokeness seems to be a positive thing for the Democratic Party. I suspect that because of that, they're likely to continue and increase the social behavior, both in terms of frequency and intensity, right? They'll make more declarations more often with bigger moral claims to like douse themselves with this perfume. Excuse me. So that's one social relation. So we're just going to jump through a few more. Okay, so let's take a look at a corporation interacting with the market, right? So it has something to sell, and there's a marketplace full of consumers. The primary incentive there is, of course, profit making. They want to try to get as much money as possible out of you. So when we look at a company performing wokeness publicly, for companies, this social behavior is performed through primarily kind of their brand, their sales and marketing, and how those things shape their brand and what it says to the consumer. And there we find corporations performing wokeness left and right, and you can pick one of a cajillion silly examples. It really doesn't matter. From the Kylie Jenner walking up with a Pepsi can to a cop in the middle of a protest nonsense, to Formula One, blazoning Black Lives Matter over everything. Like, all these things, these are corporations driven by a primary incentive, which is profit making, performing a social behavior that it believes, it suspects, has high social value, okay, in the demographics which they care about. No other explanation is acceptable here, okay? Like, maybe my analysis is flawed, maybe there are other incentives that I don't realize, okay? But to me, the primary incentive is profit making. That means that the consumer base with the most superfluous income, the most purchasing power that these companies care about, value wokeness to a high degree, that the companies are incentivized to perform it over and over and to a greater and greater intensity. Okay? And we're going to, like, in the end, when I go into my phase of wild speculation, I'm going to try to thread together why the social value is high amongst certain people, people that, you know, the Democratic Party, companies are interested in appealing to. But we're just going to go about our observations. Like, another observation that you can make is, like, actually between an employer and employees. Here you have another social relation with a very distinct set of interests. The simplest possible way to understand it is that a company wants to extract as much value out of its employees as possible. So get them to work the hardest, get them to produce as much value, and return the minimum amount. Nothing else is a rational incentive for the employer-employee relation. Like, you can add a bunch of, like, oh, the company is doing this, the company is doing that, they love their employees, whatever. But in the end, all of these are extraneous to the basic incentive, which is I want my employees to produce value for me. And as much as I can help it, as a rational actor, as a company that has a fucking brain, right, I need to try and give them as little as possible. So when we find companies performing wokeness, okay, so as an example, a friend of mine, she works for a big research organization here in Washington, and they do scientific research, medical research, and, like, the head of one of the departments sends out, like, this company-wide email talking about you know, his condemnation, or the organization's condemnation against anti-Asian violence and hate, right? This happened in the shadow of the murders that occurred in that massage parlor, I think in Atlanta. So why is that behavior performed? You have to ask the question within the context of the incentive. You have to look at it through the lens of the incentive that drives the employer, okay? The employer believes that doing this will allow them to extract more value out of their employees, okay, and give them less, okay? I suspect that this act of moral perfuming that wokeness affords you when you perform it for a given subset of society is seen as imbuing the company with value, and makes the company inherently more valuable to the employees without, like, the company actually dishing out more money. Okay, that's, like, one way you can explain it. That's actually like a lazy way of explaining it. I'm sure there are plenty of other explanations that can put the lens of the basic incentive at work here and look at the behavior, the social behavior of wokeness, and understand it better. You know, I'll leave this to you if you want to do this exercise. But again, there are plenty of ways to do this. I'm just showing my work as much as possible. I'm just showing the process. You know, so then you ask the question, okay, why do these people care? Why is it socially valuable to perform this shit? All this stuff. You know, and it's important to understand that, like, just like people don't perform social behaviors for no reason, people don't perform social behaviors that are negative, right? That have negative social value, that hurt them as opposed to help them. So there's like, no company is doing that, and they suspect that they're going to lose money on the operation. It has to be net positive. Okay. So let's go to like the last social relation that I'm going to use in this little exploration, which is kind of like at the individual and interpersonal level. If we go back to the little posters on people's doors, this is very much like I'm trying to tell my neighbors, I'm trying to tell the people that walk into my house something about myself. Okay. I know that these statements have social value amongst my peers, and I wanna do that display. There's also an even more like between the self, like this relation between the self and the self, and because we are very much social animals, we view ourselves through the lens of others, how the world views us. So even when we perform behaviors for ourselves in private, like when we view them and we assess them, we view them and assess them through what we consider to be the social consensus of our peers. And the same set of incentives very much are at play, between the self and the self in this case. And I want to kind of use this interpersonal, individual, small group context to springboard into my speculative springboard into the speculative section of our evening, which is how do I understand these various cave paintings? What do I think they tell us about the world that we inhabit? So the way that I see it is that when there's a special strata in society, not a special, but a specific strata in society, the ones who actually put these posters in front of their houses, the ones who make these statements. Like another good example is like we are on stolen land. There's a park next to where I live. It has like a wall. Somebody spray painted, we live on stolen land. Right? And like when I go through this neighborhood and then I go through like a different lower income working class neighborhood, all this stuff, all these posters, all these proclamations, they literally disappear, right? They're fucking non-existent. And this is the first delineation between one context and the other. It's like the neighborhoods that I'm jumping between aren't voting Democrat versus Republican. They're all voting Democrat, right? But the reason that, like the clue that where this wokeness is being performed and by who, tells me something really important about what wokeness, where wokeness emerges from. Okay, there is a deep-seated need amongst a specific strata of society to morally cleanse themselves, right? To douse themselves in as much as possible something that frees them from a sin that they perceive. And at this specific moment in the US, right, when we have basically what has been a steady economic decline for one strata of society, which is the lower working class, lower working classes, versus sort of the middle and upper middle class and the upper strata of society. There's this divergence that's been occurring. What we see is a state that the upper strata of society needs to explain to themselves in a meaningful way. They need to understand the world in a way that doesn't, or understand the bad things that are happening in the world in a way that doesn't implicate them. And not only doesn't implicate them, it allows them to actually feel like they deserve what they have in a system that's clearly exploitative, that's clearly crushing a lot of people. Okay, and by performing this social behavior over and over and over, just dousing themselves in perfume, declaring a sin that covers the entirety of America, we are on stolen land, and then exculpating themselves from that sin by confessing it out loud, right? What they're doing is they're making themselves more moral. Right? Every time they do it, they make themselves more moral. And this is something that I refer to as the moral autocracy. Whereas like within our last era of understanding economic disparity, we've created this nonsense of a meritocracy. The reason that some people make it and some people don't is some people are more talented, some people deserve it, some people are smarter, some people are whatever, right? And here, what you have is the upper strata of society creating a fiction about their moral standing, right? They're the ones that make these fucking pronouncements. They're the ones that say we live on stolen land. They're the ones that say Black Lives Matter. They're the ones that say no human is illegal. All immigrants are welcome. Blah, 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 right? And by doing that, they allow themselves to understand the world. They create an ideological framework. They reproduce it over and over and over that explains the world in a coherent way that doesn't cause conflict between what they want to do, which is hold on to what they have, okay, and make sure they don't give away a single thing, and the people who are fucking getting crushed by the system from which they benefit. Okay? And moreover, if you don't want to do anything to try and fix the system, okay, you're also heavily invested, okay, in creating an ideological framework that understands the world as being overwhelmingly irreparable. A world full of transhistoric evil and badness, right? This country is drowned in white supremacy and racism. This country is a settler colonial nation from the day it was born. Okay? We are, to this day, on stolen land. Like, you name it. Like, this is a country of patriarchy, a country of misogyny. Just, again, you pick it as broad and abstract as possible, the better. It makes the problem beyond the bounds of us as political actors within a system that have some measure of power. It makes it outside the realm of possibility for us to act. Okay? So back in my little Palestinian activism days, right, this was a fucking trick that like the people who argued on behalf of Israel always used. It's like this has been going on for millennia between Muslims and Jews, and it's like you can't figure it out. You don't think about it. This is too complicated. And they would repeat that over and over. And this is a problem that's been going on for millennia, blah, 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 blah. Like this is, like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a fucking modern conflict, okay? That's less than a century old, or like about a century old. And it has real material, it exists within the context of a real material context, a conflict over land and resources. Okay, but by expanding it into the abstract, stretching it out so that you don't think you can get your hands around it, the belief is that you would retreat, okay, or you can give yourself the excuse to do what you want to do anyways, which is to fucking retreat. Wokeness does that, right? Performing that social behavior over and over and over for yourself, for your friends, for others around you, doing it in public at a large scale, creates an ideological framework where nothing can be done because the system is too rotten on the inside. Everything is too evil. What do you do except announce yourself to be free from that evil by recognizing it, right? Being woke to it. So that's like the first observation in my little little speculation about what's going on based on these cave paintings. We see them happening in a specific amongst specific social relations, not all. They're happening in a specific economic strata, right? People with money, college educated. You can notice that in the language of wokeness, which is as much as possible abstract and inaccessible, and always trending towards less accessibility, more specialization, more complexity. Like, what the fuck does intersectional mean? Who the fuck cares? As long as we in the upper strata of society think we understand it, we'll go ahead and throw it around left and right. And allow all of us to agree that we, amongst each other, we all agree that we're the good people, and all the stuff that's happening in the world, is unfortunate, but it's a really big problem. And, the moral autocracy tells us that moral people, I understand why things are going well for me because I'm a good person. But like the big question then becomes like, okay, how does the social value of wokeness increase? Is it just these people looking for an explanation for why their fortunes are better than the people who are getting crushed, and why it's okay to basically ignore them and not do anything fucking material to help them out, things that are real, that can be voted on, that you can demand from politicians, or is there something more? I would claim that there is something a little bit more complex to it than just like, oh, it's just this strata of society spontaneously emerges with more and more wokeness under economic stresses. Okay, there is social tension that exists, and they're responding to it. I think it's a slightly bit more complex, although this is an ingredient. So I want to take us back to something that I've talked about a lot, which is this idea of that we live in a system, and as a system, any system that's been around for a long time has instrumented itself, okay, with tools to maintain its stability. Okay, these tools are myriad and varied, right? They are cultural, they are state apparatus, they are the coercive force of the law. They are all the institutions that have power and can exercise it in one way or another. Like, so for example, corporations have an insane amount of power over their employees, right? And can coerce them to do a lot. Take these HR classes that teach you how you're supposed to talk, how you're supposed to think, how to whatever. And so all of this collection of instruments within the state, okay, over time, it learns, like if you think about it as an organism with a lot of independent and symbiotic structures. Like, I'm made up of a bunch of different types of cells, a bunch of different organs, And it's not like they're all one thing. They're each a separate thing, but they coordinate in some magical way in order to produce a stable system and a stable outcome. So there are, I would say, three ways that a system can maintain its stability. One, it's like things are going good for most people. Okay, the system affords everybody the ability, or enough people, the ability to socially reproduce themselves, and so there's the tensions in society are low. Okay. Now, the other option is just use coercive force, right? If tensions are high in society because this basic function of the system, which is allowing people to self-reproduce, to eat, have shelter, all this stuff, is fraying. Okay, people are moving from one strata of quality of life to another, being pushed down. That creates tension. You can manage that by force, right? Through coercion. And there are plenty of coercive methods that are available to you, and different countries and different institutions do different things. The second way of dealing with a loss of basic function or an increased amount of social tension within a system that's destabilizing for some reason is through the reproduction of stabilizing ideologies, right? So what we do is we all start performing, like as a natural response, we all start performing behaviors that pull us back into an understanding of the world that explains why these social tensions or why these material disparities are happening, why the failures in social reproduction are occurring, and allows us to sidestep the social tensions somehow, okay, by injecting basic ideologies into people's minds. Okay, this is why, if you look at any country, and this is very relevant in the Middle East that I grew up in, and then the Middle East that I observed as an immigrant in the United States, is that as the quality of life indices in a country like Egypt went down after the failure of sort of the Nasserite pan-Arab socialist project, you have this massive increase in religious ideology in society, right? This is an attempt at stabilizing the system through creating or spreading an ideology that creates moral logic that explains why good things and bad things happen, okay? Instead of a practical understanding of the world, like a material one. It inserts a religious moral understanding, like there are people who are performing, there's sinful acts and there's widespread sin in society, and this is why you're suffering and you're unhappy. And we are going to go ahead and adopt religious behaviors, and we're going to do them more and more and more in order to try and fix this country. And it never gets fixed, and you just have to ratchet it up. You ratchet up this stabilizing ideology until you can't use it anymore. So here what I would claim is okay, given this context that we live in a system, the system has a lot of pieces, and within it, there are a lot of pieces who are highly interested in maintaining the stability of the system. We live in a capitalist system. People are highly interested in maintaining the function of capitalism the way it is. Okay. Some of them don't even fucking benefit from it, but it's just the behavior that they learn because maybe their parents have benefited greatly, or their social peers benefit greatly, or just benefit, period, right, from the system. So the social behaviors that we adopt aren't necessarily just about our individual incentives, but rather the collective incentives that we might belong to. And so when I observe wokeness emerging and getting ramped up in the US, And I observed that happening within the context of precipitous decline in people's fortunes in the lower strata of society, while the upper strata of society maintain, okay, or even increase their quality of life, okay, then wokeness makes sense to me. I understand why it's emerging, okay, and I understand why these various actors, political parties, corporations, interacting with their market, employers interacting with their employees, and the professionals and the managers and the college educated and the well-to-do, all of them both independently and symbiotically, okay, reproduce this social behavior or act out the social behavior that gives you the two pieces of stability that you're missing when you when the normal social reproduction starts to fail. Okay, people in America are doing this. They're going down, a bunch of them. This creates social tension. Wokeness affords the system two things. One, a system of coercion, right? It can label people as being bad and allows you to dismiss them, criminalize them, leave them in a state of neglect. I talked about this in the last video within the context of what the 80s meant for an African-American portion of society that the US wanted to abandon. And there you went through the task of ideological reproduction in order to justify this abandonment and the carceral response, the violent response of the state in order to contain the social tensions that emerged out of that segmented society. So wokeness provides you an instrument by which you can delineate the moral from the immoral and use it as a fucking stick to punish people and threaten people and allow people to be afraid. Second thing it does is that it creates an ideology that comforts those up top for why they are where they are, because they're good people. And you can tell they're good people because they have the fucking posters and they say the things all the fucking time. Obviously, they deserve what they have. But it does double duty because it also tells the people who are fucking going down in society, who, like somebody like the Democratic Party is supposed to appeal to and be on their side. Okay, it tells them that your problems aren't because we fail politically. It's not because these corporations are keeping the money and they refuse to redistribute it in any shape, way, or form. It's not because of all this stuff. It's because of the bigger questions, the big moral sins of this country. It's because the evil blood running through its veins, right? It's a basic religious message. And the hope is that you convince people that they should adopt fatalism, pessimism, give up, don't ask for anything, right? Don't ask for meaningful change. Just ask for more moral condemnation. Empty, vacuous bullshit. Okay, those are the horizons of your expectations. If you're an African American, don't ask for healthcare. Don't ask for good jobs. Don't ask for livable communities, right? None of that stuff. Just ask that people say a phrase that says that it's okay that you live. Like an act of such fucking austerity, it's such a reactionary thing, okay, to demand that people shrink the horizons of what they want politically, materially, to fucking nonsense, okay? But yet, this is the prevalent ideology because what these fucking cave paintings tell me is that we are in a moment of decline that the system is struggling to contain. And one expression, one part of this immune response of the system, this symbiotic response that occurs of all these interdependent actors that are interested in the stability of the system, one of those expressions is wokeness. And to answer the question, how will wokeness end? Okay, wokeness doesn't fucking end. Okay, wokeness is gonna marry itself to this decline. It gets amplified, and the only when it fades quite a bit from now. Okay, when it fades, it'll happen when this decline either ends, reverses itself, or we just reach a point where people accept their new fucked up lot in life, and the social tension associated with the decline itself, the transition, fades away. And the wokeness, the social behavior, it'll still be performed even after we reach that point, but slowly but surely its value is going to recede and the behavior is going to recede as well. And the people who are arguing, hey, stop doing wokeness, you can't fucking stop it, right? The conditions that create it have not gone away. The most you can hope for, or all that you're asking when you say fucking stop doing wokeness, is for it to transition to something else, right? Some other social behavior that creates basically the same ideological output and provides you with the same tools of coercion. That's all you can get. And so if you want to be intentional and say, okay, this is fucked up, okay, you don't look at wokeness itself, you don't look at the social behavior and say, okay, we need to condemn it, we need to reduce it, we need to manage it, whatever it is. That's a fucking nonsense task. Okay, you ask the question, what are the conditions and how can they be modified? And believing that they can be modified through this little immune response that the system has, I think is it's just fucking wrong. Anyways, this is my little bit about wokeness. I hope you enjoyed it. I am hoping to do another one pretty soon. I'll see you when I see you. Bye.